Hello everyone, my name is John and welcome to my channel, Hawkeye Review and Analysis. I appreciate everyone that stops in to listen as I discuss Kuma's race and its importance to the story. I want to apologize if the text-to-speech is off-putting, but I have a speech impediment that would make me hard to understand. Jumping right into it, I firmly believe that Kuma is a half-giant, a hybrid race of giant and human. There is not enough information to speculate on the name of this race or even if it has a unique name other than half-giant. If you remember back during the Davy Back fight, we were introduced to Big Pan, who's a Watan, which is a hybrid of giant and fishman. While a half-giant may not sound very exciting at first, it has a great importance to the story, both past and future. Some may say that because of various human characters in the story being so tall they must have giant in their lineage, and I'm not so sure about that. In fact, I'm wondering if human DNA and giant DNA are even compatible under normal circumstances. If it were, I don't think gigantification like we saw Caesar trying to perfect would be thought impossible. You would think if human DNA and giant DNA were compatible, genius scientists like Vegapunk and Caesar would be able to mix the two, making the giant DNA the dominate genes and removing any limiting factors, thus creating giant-sized humans. This is especially true if you take into consideration that Vegapunk cracked the lineage factor or DNA. He should be able to work with and modify DNA easily. There has to be a reason gigantification is thought impossible, and the only thing that makes sense to me is human DNA and giant DNA are not compatible, and cracking the lineage factor couldn't overcome this incompatibility. To cover all of my bases, I will say, for argument's sake, if that's not the case and there are other hybrid children of human and giant, Kuma's race of half-giant might be special. It could be where the half-giant of Kuma's race comes from ancient giants. In either case, I believe the Bartholomew lineage will trace back to the ancient kingdom. I will touch on gigantification later on in the video. The question would be then, what happened in the Bartholomew family lineage to make the impossible possible? Now, I also want to say that I believe Linlin or Big Mom is also of this same race, and in fact Kuma's older sister. As absurd as that sounds at first, I think I can make the case. I have always been interested in the name Linlin. It seems unusual even in the One Piece world. In doing research for this theory, I discovered there was a famous giant panda named Ling Ling that was born in China in 1985 and given to the largest zoo in Tokyo, Japan in 1992, where he lived until his death in 2008. Despite being a male panda, his name in Chinese means darling little girl. What is also notable about the year 1992 is that is when Oda started his career. Ling Ling was seen as a symbol of the friendship between China and Japan, and Big Mom wants all of the races in the world to become a family. I'm curious now if Linlin is named after this bear, and the first of several connections to Linlin and bears. I'm sure most of you watching know this, but I do want to state that Kuma in Japanese means bear. Now, I know there is a 21-year age gap between Linlin and Kuma, but Linlin's parents we saw in the flashback weren't very old. It is not out of the realm of possibility they had Kuma in their late 40s or early 50s. It could very well be they had trouble conceiving or carrying children. Also, if we look at the name sorbet, which is a dessert, this could have been a clever hint from Oda about Linlin's connection. Most would think the reason Linlin names all of her territories after sweets and desserts is because of her well-known sweet tooth, but in truth it could hold a double meaning. In Linlin's flashback it was stated she was human, but I think this was Oda only revealing half the story. If Linlin is half-giant as I theorize, then she is also half-human. This was Oda's way to give us just enough to keep us guessing. When it comes to the Sorbet Kingdom, it is my theory that at least the Bartholomew royal family is comprised of this race of half-giants, and there are at least two things that make this race unique. One is every child born has the chance to inherit the gene for gigantism. Though they will never reach the height of full-blooded giants, they will tower over normal humans. Not every child will inherit this gene, and some will be average in height. This is why if you compare Linlin to her parents, she is so massive even at 5 years old, or if you compare Bonnie to Kuma. The second is, I believe even if the child does not inherit the gene for gigantism, they will be blessed with immense strength and durability, equal to or possibly even surpassing that of a full-blooded giant. They very well could be one of the strongest living races currently in the One Piece world. We saw this with Linlin as a child being stronger than all of the giants in the village. It was also shown Linlin killed a bear with one blow, which is impressive, but also one of many instances where a bear is shown in connection with Linlin. We also have mentioned that Vegapunk was impressed with Kuma's strength, and within the story Bonnie has displayed impressive feats of strength herself. If I had to compare this to something, I would say it is similar to the Saiyan race from Dragon Ball, where the half-blooded Saiyan have the potential to be even stronger than their full-blooded counterparts. Given Oda's love for the Dragon Ball franchise, I would not be surprised to learn this half-giant race took inspiration from the Saiyans. You could even compare Linlin's hunger-induced rampage in the Elbaf village during her childhood to Goku transforming into a great ape as a child. The trade-off for these gifts is no matter if the child is average height or blessed with gigantism, they will have giant-sized appetites or metabolisms. We saw this very thing with Big Mom and have seen it with Bonnie. Now I think it's important to examine Linlin and Kuma's parents. The first thing that I want to point out is the ship they traveled on to escort Linlin to Elbaf, or more importantly the golden figurehead that adorns the ship. Golden animal figureheads adorn the ships of nobility in the One Piece world. We see this more with the celestial dragon's ships, but theirs are much more ornate. All signs point to this ship being a royal vessel, and it is my theory it is a royal vessel of the Sorbet Kingdom. What makes the figurehead on this ship even more interesting is it appears to be a bear. The bear may very well be the symbol of the Bartholomew royal family and add a double meaning to Kuma's name and his bear-themed attire. As to who their parents are, at the reverie Bonnie uses her devil fruit to transform into an old woman. She is recognized as Connie, the Queen Dowager of the Sorbet Kingdom. With this information I can safely speculate Connie is the name of the then young woman we see and the name of Kuma and Linlin's mother. That would indicate the man we see is their father and the once king of the Sorbet Kingdom, at this point in time though he might have been the prince. I cannot speculate as to his name with as little information as there is available, but if I had to guess I would say it might start with a B. I say this because Connie and Bonnie's names are so similar. Bonnie's name might be a mixture of her grandparents' names. I do not believe he is still living, and this would line up with Connie having the title of Queen Dowager. A Queen Dowager is the title given to the widow of a king. It stands to reason that if Kuma was once the king, he inherited the crown from his father upon death, making his wife Connie the Queen Dowager. I want to take a moment to point out the resemblance of this man with Kuma. Especially notable is the hair. That is not the only resemblance that needs to be pointed out though. Bonnie is fortunate that she herself looks exactly like her grandmother as an old woman, so she can use that to her advantage, like gaining entry into the reverie. But if you compare Bonnie disguised as Connie to Mother Caramel, they look exactly alike. I don't think it's a coincidence or an act of repetitive art styles. I think that's because Mother Caramel is in fact the mother of Connie and Bonnie's great-grandmother. All of the women in this family seem to share a resemblance to each other. The most notable is the pink hair, starting with Connie. Now focusing on Connie, I believe we will learn she is just as evil as her mother, and her marrying the king of the Sorbet Kingdom was all a carefully planned scheme to produce at least one half-giant child to sell to the world government. The most difficult part of this scheme was to figure out how to get the child into the hands of Mother Caramel to sell without their father knowing. Linlin herself made that especially easy, as due to her destructive nature Connie was able to convince her husband it best they take Linlin to Elbaf to live in hopes the Holy Mother take her in. The king thought he was only doing what was best for his daughter and his people, while Connie was secretly rejoicing the scheme had succeeded. She played her role very well and acted as she was just as emotional over it as her husband to keep up appearances. This makes Linlin's backstory even more tragic than at first glance if you consider her mother never cared about her at all and only saw her as a commodity to sell. Mother Caramel never even bothered telling Linlin they were related, as that didn't matter. Linlin and Mother Caramel's connection to Kuma was even foreshadowed if we go back and look. When Linlin first arrived at Sheep's house, Mother Caramel is standing outside with the children. The child directly behind her is in a bear costume, I think this boy represents Kuma. The child in front of Mother Caramel is a prince. In the anime at least it is mentioned that this prince was expelled from his country after a coup. Now we learn Kuma was a king who was expelled from his country. This level of foreshadowing by Oda is quite impressive. Getting back to the matter at hand and trying to explain to why Mother Caramel went so far as to convince her daughter to marry the king and produce at least one child is how valuable these children would be to the world government. While we never saw the exact amount Mother Caramel requested for Linlin, it was so high it shocked her contact. This was her retirement plan, as it was enough she would never have to worry about money again. Bonnie states it was because of Kuma's strength that Vegapunk extended the offer to Kuma to become a warlord in exchange for willingly subjecting himself to experimentation and cloning. I'm not sure that is the whole story based on what I theorize about Connie and Bonnie's continued insistence that her father was a good man. I think it's likely Connie is the one that orchestrated Kuma being labeled a tyrant and getting him expelled from the kingdom. When Linlin ate Mother Caramel, the world government lost their chance at acquiring such a valuable asset. I think it is then they researched where Linlin came from and discovered she was from the Sorbet kingdom, and were probably shocked to discover Mother Caramel's daughter Connie was sitting queen consort. I think it was then they made contact with Connie to try to make a deal in acquiring a child. I'm not sure what the world government offered in exchange for one. It could have simply been money but might have been something more important. I firmly believe Connie is every bit the evil schemer and mastermind like her mother, like daughter they say. The problem was there wasn't any way for Connie to deliver a child to them without the king knowing. Connie had to make sure above all else she kept up appearances or jeopardize her standing as queen. She was forced into playing the long game and had to wait for the right moment. I think that it was only when her husband was dead that she could set all of this into motion. The issue was then Kuma was already grown and inherited the crown, becoming king. Connie was not about to let any of that stop her though. Kuma was no longer a child by this point, but he would have still been incredibly valuable to the world government. Connie just had to figure out how to deliver him to them. That's when she plotted and schemed to cause an uprising within the kingdom and frame Kuma as a tyrant so his very people would do her dirty work for her. Sure enough, it worked and Kuma was framed, then soon expelled, losing his crown and the protection that came with it in the process. As the saying goes, Kuma was now a sitting duck. He was forced into becoming a pirate, and it was all a setup so the world government could then arrest him without it causing a stir. They could never arrest or kidnap royal children or a sitting king, but a pirate? No one would bat an eye. For Connie this also would be killing two birds with one stone, as with Kuma gone it also allowed her to take the crown for herself. Bonnie's statement that Kuma is her only family leads me to believe there wasn't anyone else for the crown to pass to but Connie. All of those years of scheming and plotting went just how Connie wanted. Her husband was dead, her children gone, she was reigning queen of the kingdom, and rewarded handsomely by the world government. The only thing that did not go to her plan is Kuma joining the revolutionary army. As far as Connie currently in the story, I believe she is either dead or disowned by Bonnie. I suspect we will find Kuma learned of his mother's treachery prior to being expelled from the kingdom and took Bonnie with him to protect her. If that is the case, it's most likely Bonnie spent the remainder of her childhood with the revolutionaries until becoming a pirate. Bonnie herself backs this claim up by stating that she visited Egghead as a child when Vegapunk first started building the foundation of the island. At this point in time, Vegapunk had begun working with the world government and Kuma was a warlord. So Kuma had already been exiled from the Sorbet kingdom by his people. He would not have been able to get his daughter to take her places. A life of a warlord is not one for a child, so it would only make sense for Kuma to leave his precious daughter with people he trusts, that being the revolutionaries. This is probably one reason Bonnie does not use the last name Bartholomew. After Kuma was arrested, he was then sentenced to life in imprisonment until Vegapunk found him and offered him a deal. Or that's the story Bonnie knows. I think Vegapunk knew exactly who and what Kuma was when they first met. As stated in my Vegapunk deep dive, I believe Vegapunk allowed himself to be arrested, and I think the same goes for Kuma. I don't think Vegapunk just happened to observe Kuma one day in the prison yard and thought he would make great cloning material. No, this was all a plan by the world government, but also a plan of the revolutionaries. I think this was part of the world government's plan to force Kuma into accepting the deal Vegapunk would later offer him. It forced Kuma to decide between becoming a lab rat or never seeing his daughter again, or so the world government thought. While the world government had their plans, the revolutionaries had plans of their own. As stated, I believe Kuma learned of his mother's treachery and of the world government and would have shared this information with the revolutionaries. Again, going back to my Vegapunk theory, he allowed himself to be arrested to work from the inside and use the world government to fund their own destruction. To build those weapons, Vegapunk would have wanted to use Kuma as a base for the clones and use his half-giant DNA to create super weapons. Kuma, knowing the cause was to bring down the world government, was willing to sacrifice himself to this end. The problem was there is no way that the world government would allow a known revolutionary on Egghead Island to work with Vegapunk. That is when the plan was hatched to use the world government's own nefarious plan against them. Kuma allowed himself to be arrested so he and Vegapunk could work together without drawing suspicion from the world government, as they thought their plan had succeeded. I honestly think we will find Vegapunk holds some level of remorse over what he did to Kuma, but it was a necessary means to an end. This might also be why Vegapunk states he is going to die, as Bonnie is on a collision course to meet him, and she might not be able to accept his explanation. She has every right to be angry about how Kuma was used, but I hope she can respect his decision when she learns how important it is. I think, however, we will find Vegapunk has the means to restore Kuma. He just hasn't yet, and this ties into his reasoning to become a cyborg. Now, if I were to speculate on Kuma's reasoning on agreeing to become a cyborg, it could very well be a deal with the world government to protect Bonnie. She is of the same half-giant race and could be experimented on or used to produce more half-giant children that would become perfect soldiers for the world government. Kuma would not want his daughter to live as a lab rat like he did, so he made an agreement with the world government to protect her. This obviously was not part of the plan of the revolutionaries, and Vegapunk would not have wanted to turn him into a cyborg, but begrudgingly did so, knowing this was Kuma's only way to protect Bonnie. Again, I think Vegapunk has the means to restore Kuma. They were just waiting until they knew for sure Bonnie was safe. Possibly the day the revolutionaries set into motion their grand plan and attacked the world government. Now, getting to what this could potentially mean for the future of the story. If we go back to Punk Hazard, Caesar Clown was trying to perfect the means of gigantification. It is stated that to this day no one has been able to achieve it, and most think it is impossible to achieve. The world government want to use gigantification to turn normal humans into giants to form the most powerful army in the world. Now, it's also stated that even Vegapunk himself was not able to achieve gigantification. I would argue, though, that might not be the case currently, and only what Caesar knows up until the point him and Vegapunk explosively parted ways. If the trouble with perfecting the means of gigantification was rooted in giant DNA and human DNA not being compatible, then you could see where the importance a race of half-giants would play. If that is the case, then somewhere in the Bartholomew family lineage something miraculous occurred and the first half-giant child was conceived. Possibly a devil fruit was involved in creating this miraculous event. It would explain why half-giants are so rare, with the only known living members are Linlin, Kuma, and Bonnie. Even though Big Mom has many children, none inherited her genes, and I think we can safely speculate why. I would say in order to pass on her half-giant genes to a child it must be fathered by a human or giant, and she never had a child with either. I would even argue that Linlin herself never knew she was a half-giant and considered herself human. That would explain why she went so far as to try to have a giant child in the family, never knowing she herself was half-giant. You can imagine Linlin had a lot of resentment towards her parents and the Sorbet Kingdom. She considered Mother Caramel her mother and took her last name, even though unbeknownst to her it was also her mother's maiden name. I doubt very seriously she ever considered going back home. To her that was the homeland that abandoned her. I doubt even Linlin and Kuma knew of their relation to each other. Most likely the only living people that know are Vegapunk, the revolutionaries, and certain members of the world government. I think this will be revealed in the story when Vegapunk goes into his backstory with Kuma. Now with that said, there is one other character that fits in with this race, and that's our main rubbery boy himself, Luffy. Now I know this might sound a little crazy, but within the 21-year time span between the birth of Lin and Kuma, there could have been another daughter born. If that were the case, then that daughter might very well be Luffy's mom. I mean, he certainly has the characteristics of this race. The strength, the durability, the appetite, and the metabolism to go with it. Also, Luffy has always dreamed of being a giant and incorporated gigantification in his gears until finally realizing his dream of becoming a full-size giant in Gear 5th. Wouldn't it be crazy if he was actually of this half-giant race and Bonnie's cousin? If this were the case and it turned out that Luffy was the nephew of Kuma, it would be another possible motive for Kuma's actions in regards to helping the Straw Hats. And would explain how Kuma came to join the revolutionaries if Dragon was in fact Kuma's brother-in-law. Just something to keep in mind until we have more definitive proof. I can't help but chuckle if this is true, as it would be the story of the three bears, like from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Are we to find the Sorbet Kingdom is based on classic fairy tales? Lin or Big Mom certainly is a mama bear. Now getting back to gigantification. As stated earlier, there is the possibility that it is the case where Kuma's race of half-giants are special, and that being that the half-giant part comes from ancient giants. If so, their lineage might go back to the ancient kingdom, as it is my theory that the ancient world was a utopia where all the races lived together in harmony, and that certainly would tie into Lin's ambition to have all the races as a family, but I'll touch on that more in my Void Century video. It very well could be that through his experimentation with Kuma, Vegapunk has since perfected the means of gigantification, and we may see this before the end of the arc. We have evidence of this already with the Seraphim, as we have seen they are much larger than normal children. In chapter 1065 it is even stated that the Seraphim Jinbei is as large as the real Jinbei. Now I also want to take the time to mention half-giants are very important in Norse mythology, which Elbaf is centered around. I think this will spill over into the next arc, and we might find where the Bartholomew family lineage traces back to Elbaf. I think that about does it for today. Again, thank you for taking the time to listen. I hope you found this insightful. If you would like to see more theories and analysis, please do all the normal YouTube things of liking and subscribing, and feel free to leave a comment.